We are live. This is the boring bit where we're both looking on our phones to get the information. Does it also remind you?
Yes, it's reminding.
Yeah, there we are.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. And there's a delay on that. Hello everyone. Welcome to our second hobby hangout. Where today we'll be hobbying and discussing the Becky Chambers series of books. Oh, I better actually mute my phone because this is going to confuse me otherwise. The Becky Chambers series of books, the Wayfarer series. I can't find the mute button. Where's the mute button?
Just put on Do Not Disturb. Does that not use it?
No. There we go, done it.
Events colleague had that recently on the call as well.
You would never believe I'm a pro. I professionally live stream, you know. Yeah, that's what I think as well. That's right. Anyway, shall we talk hobby? What are you doing today?
Should we introduce ourselves first? I know most people watching now will know who we are.
I'm Dave.
I'm Cathy.
There we go. If you found us by any other means, I suppose
What, you're going to put on YouTube?
We are going to put on YouTube, yes.
When it gets around to it.
So, Cathy, what are you doing today?
I am continuing with my project from last week, in which I am sewing a swan. Made
Watch
of
it, Mr. Mantle.
Onto yes. While it's on Facebook, people can
Yes, please feel free to comment. This why I'll be keeping. That's why I've got my phone there. So
if it's YouTube, then this was a while ago. So
if you have a time machine and watching it on YouTube, do come back in time and let us know.
What a stupid use for a time machine! Wouldn't you warn people about the pandemic?
Fair enough.
Depends what the rules of time travel.
Yeah, just.
Anyway,
that's for another day.
Yeah, we'll cover that later. I don't think there's any. No, I don't think there's time travel and stuff we're doing today. So yes, I'm sewing a felt swan onto some green felt, which is part of a sort of 12 days of Christmas thing that I'm working on. So I've done 1 to 6 for last Christmas, and this year I'm doing 7 to 12, which is trickier because after this one they stop being birds and people, harder to sew than birds. But anyway, yeah, just focusing on the swan right now. And what are you doing?
What am I doing? I am doing Thanos. I am making Thanos for Marvel Crisis Protocol. I am building Thanos and his throne because they are awesome. For those that watched last time and were interested, I have made further progress on my ones from last time, but I can't paint down here doing these, so these get painted upstairs. But work in progress. So I actually have some paint on my Scarab Terminators from last time. A lot of gold, a lot of blue, which actually is a theme. A lot of gold and a lot of blue. An Infinity Gem. So there we go. Yeah, I mean, yes, Manel. I'm sure there are higher things up on your priority list if you had a time machine. I presume everyone else would do, but you never know. Someone might. Just passing through. Off to do something more important.
Once on Twitter, Shauna Maguire said that she could try and come to our wedding with stock tips if she had a time machine.
I think that's very kind of her.
I don't actually know her. It was just one of these things where people were talking on Twitter about what was at people's wedding. I mentioned our wedding music and she said I found it impressive. Could she come? And I was like, well, you'd have to go to September 2009.
I mean, if she made it, great. Although, would we actually have known who she was at that point?
We're probably not by face or anything, though.
No, I don't know. Would we have read anything of hers at that point?
I think you were reading the Myra Grant book.
Might have been Myra Grant stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. It's okay. She would have been a cool person to have at our wedding. Not that everyone else who was at our wedding are all cool people as well, except perhaps
probably
some members of my family. But everyone else. Yeah.
Well, maybe your brother, but otherwise.
No, Alan doesn't have any internet at the moment.
Oh dear.
Well, no, he hasn't got any computers because he pulled them apart. It's a long story, which nobody here actually wants to hear, except possibly Malol, and he may well know already. So, anyway,
shall we move on?
Yeah, I was going to say, shall we move on?
How are we doing?
How are we doing? I'm not doing too badly. How are you doing?
I'm okay now. So we're both working from home, which, makes us very fortunate in many ways. And also our son is here as well, so that's like a little tricky. But my work in general, under normal circumstances, gets busier and busier into summer, with the very busy bit being in 3 weeks' time in August. But this year, we're doing it from home rather than the office. So that's a bit weird. And then a lot of things have been delayed because of everything. So things are now just feeling very, very busy. And there's a lot of processing, which I do, which is fine. But then some processing just got very difficult today. I think I'm slightly cursed from a work point of view, although it started to turn around towards the end of the day. But yes, so earlier I was a bit like, But yeah, calmed down a bit now, so that's good. Anyway, that's probably quite dull. Otherwise, generally fine.
I'm in the process of trying to get staff sorted for order and collect for the library service. We are currently working through that. So I'm currently working with whoever will listen to me about how we should be training staff to give them the most support, because I don't want library staff going back into buildings without as much backup as possible, because it's stressful. We're all stressed. To give the best customer service, we need to be as working as simply as possible. So I am, I'm sure, annoying senior management with a continued...
Obviously, I had a very productive meeting with one of our sort of new boss the other day, me and a colleague. That's because we're working on a whole thing that people are generally behind. So that was quite nice. I think it was only after that I felt like things were going down.
Oh, to be fair, our senior management, I think are listening, but
doesn't mean you're not annoying them, I guess.
No, it doesn't mean I'm not annoying them with it, because yeah. But anyway, yes. we're doing well from that point of view, and I'm live streaming my continuing with my live streaming. If you want to listen to some first chapters of some funny stories, I'm going to be live streaming some of them sometime soon. Most likely starting with Owen Colfer's Artemis Fowl. So if you've seen the Netflix show...
Are you promoting work on our thing again?
I may be.
He's never off the clock.
Yes, but I'm never off the clock for libraries. I feel
this is not a good cause, yeah.
Yeah, this is not... It could...
Maybe I'll say some museum stuff soon.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, we have a captive audience.
Well, we'll see.
Hopefully.
Isn't it mostly Mammal who doesn't live in this city? Anyway.
Mammal obviously wasn't interested to know.
Sure. Yes. So, but I think generally doing okay. And if you haven't seen the previous one, it's one of the reasons we were sort of doing this is to give us some time together to actually, maybe in a slightly organised way, sort of do some craft stuff and also talk about things that we like. Because at present, with us both working from home, we're kind of having very much the same day. It's just the details of the work that's a bit different. But
Manor claims he's not captive, he can leave whenever he wants.
Okay, well...
That's a fair point.
Maybe let's try not to scare him off.
I try not to. I wasn't really, I mean, I'll just be quiet now.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's fine.
So do you want to talk about stuff we're reading at the moment?
Yes. Well, okay. So mine's going to be actually 2 books back, because the last book I finished is one of the Wayfarer series, which is kind of why we're doing it. So I'm going to briefly talk about the one I read in between, because it's thin and I can actually read a decent speed. That is backwards, so that's this. So this was this is Holm Iski. John Scalzi, Consuming Fire. It is the second in his. Does it have a series name?
I don't know. It's not on the book. That's the kind of thing you should check before.
I'm a professional, I have you know. So no.
He's a book.
Interdependency series. First one being the Collapsing Empire. I'm enjoying them. They're relatively light, although the topic in this is actually quite basically a galactic empire spanning many worlds, but as kind of in the name, they're interdependent on each other, because most of them are orbital colonies or space stations, and they only have one planet that they can actually live on, and they use the flow kind of like rivers between each planet, each system, and
so it's kind of like boats, but
you can, yeah. But then something happens to how the empire is connected, and just as a new empress, no gender on it, is comes to the throne, things start going downhill for them, and so yeah, this is the first one is setting up everything going downhill. The middle book is everything going downhill, and I'd imagine the third book would be hopefully some sort of positive resolution.
Okay. See, I'm listening to a podcast quite a bit of time, well, sometime I'm working at the moment, about their own empire, and they're getting out of the crisis of the 3rd century, but there's been many episodes of just, and then it got worse, and then it got worse, and then it got worse. So,
I mean, yeah.
That's actually history.
This is likely to get worse. But, you know, John Scalzi, excellent author. I definitely suggest, if you want to have a read something of his, The Old Man's War. Excellent bit of... I hesitate to call it military sci-fi. It is military sci-fi, insofar it's about military science. Yeah, but it's
then
not...
again, like, Star Wars isn't military sci-fi, despite that being literally the name.
Red Shirt, excellent book if you like your Star Trek. It's basically Lower Decks, the book. We've got Lock-In upstairs. I need to...
I think I've seen that, yeah.
But yeah, okay. Definitely a good author.
Okay, so I have just finished BBS still this morning. Almost. This. I don't know how clear that is. And again, it's backwards. It's
reflective as well.
Yeah.
That's not helping.
So it's The True Queen by Zen Cho. So this is...
We're doing sequels.
Yeah. So I think this is the second novel. It's So the first one was called Sorceress of the Crown, which came out a while ago, and I read it initially in 2016, and I think I reread it last year, because the author, she's originally from Malaysia, but she currently lives in the same city as us, or at least she did last year, and she did a talk, so I went to that, which was quite good, and then it was when she was promoting this book. So yes, it's got some of the same characters as in Sorceress of the Crown, but in that book, so main characters in that book are kind of more secondary characters than this one. And this one has some new characters, and also, again, some secondary characters from the previous book kind of come more to the fore in this one. So they're related, but I think you can read them separately. You know, there's sort of mention stuff happens before, but it all sort of ties in. It's not kind of like necessarily direct, like follow-on-y type sequel. But yes, no, this is very good. I've read those two. I think I read one or two of her short stories, or listened to them as audio narrations. But yes, this one, Sorceress of the Crown, quite good. They're so it's very fantasy based. It's a world in which it's basically kind of like a Regency style period. Although I don't think it's actually the Regency. I think they mentioned the King once or twice. It's not really about that, but there's magic everywhere. And it's basically kind of got the tone of Diana Wynne Jones, but like sort of more adult than kid. But also like Georgette Heyer. At least the authors cited her as a sort of influence. So there's a lot of like slightly. So the Diana Wynne Jones tone is sort of like there are a lot of things happening and people are sort of like. Being forced to change things in their life, and then magical stuff keeps happening, and more people appear, and things get more complicated. But it's kind of feels fairly light, even though obviously stakes can be quite high for the characters. The Georgette Heyer thing is obviously the setting, and also to an extent the language. So it's got this slightly elaborate way that people talk. So I was going to come up with some examples and I can't think of them now, but I occasionally talk slightly more elaborately than I probably need to, so I kind of enjoy that. It's not actually hard to read or anything, but it's sort of that style of thing. So sort of like, you know, your Regency stuff, like sort of Austen and I say Georgia Hare and that kind of, not full on that, but you know, a fair bit of that. But it's also, I say the authors from Malaysia originally, so it's also, so it's kind of Regency, but there are like women and people of colour doing stuff. So the first book, Sorcerer's of the Crown, is about a guy called Zacharias' wife, I think it is, who is actually black, but was adopted by a very senior. So the magicians in it are called thaumaturges. Thaumaturges? I'm never sure how to say that word. Anyway, who are basically kind of like the upper class of the magic, and it seems very much a gentleman's thing, you know. English gentlemen, women must not do magic. Except it kind of becomes clear in both books that actually poor women do magic probably quite a bit in a small way, but it's not for gentlewomen. So in the first book, Zacharias has ended up being the foremost magician in the country, but he's also black, and most of his peers do not like that, and it's a whole thing. And then there's another character called Prunella who's mixed race, and she sort of comes into magic and stuff to do with them. So they appear in this book more as side characters. I think there's like one or two bits from Prunella's point of view. So in this book, there's basically English women are starting to learn magic in a more official capacity, but it's not approved of. So there's sort of people who are interested in it sort of secretly, and then some who are sort of like sneaking around against their family's wishes. And there's also new characters. It's most from the point of view of a woman called Muna. Yeah, Muna. Who, her and her sister are from an island which I think is what would now be Malaysia, but that's not mentioned. She speaks Malay, so that's that sort of background. Her and her sister were found on a beach after a big storm, and were taken in by a very powerful witch in the area, who does appear in the previous book as well. But then, through various sort of complications, they end up having to go to England, go to Britain, and see an important magician there. But they get separated through magical stuff, and it's mostly from the point of view of Muna. So there's Muna's the main character you tend to get, and there's also her sister Sakti. And there's a lot of stuff about sisters in it. And in fact, when I went to the talk that Zen Cho did in Birmingham last year, she said, you know, something at one point about how, stuff about how sisters can be quite different, don't always get along. And myself and two other women in the audience all went, yes, in exactly that tone, all at the same time, which then later said on Twitter was quite funny. But it's just like, oh, okay, you're there and you're like, yeah, so that's all a thing for us. I'm assuming my sister isn't watching. But yes, we haven't always got along, and we're very different in kind of personality and interests. And so there's a bit of stuff with that. But it's it's good fun because it's sort of, let's say that they're kind of quite light-hearted, but then there's stuff like, obviously there's stuff to do with like racism and sexism in it just because the setting. So like there's the fact that at one point, these English women, their school's being attacked, and so this woman who's visiting from the different part of the world is like, is it the French? They're like, oh no, we there's a treaty with the French sorciers. Like, oh no, every time this happens to an Englishman, it's like, wait, they're attacking their own countrywomen, because this woman's from a place where witches are kind of the more powerful magic users, so she doesn't understand why the English wouldn't let women, that they're upper class women, do magic. And there's also some cultural confusion stuff. So like one woman who's very, very hospitable and wants to be very welcoming is very pleased to show Muna the pork chop with mustard, and then Muna's quite embarrassed that she has to say no, she can't eat that because of her religion. And the other woman's, oh no, she's very shocked, she hadn't thought of that. So then Muna feels like she has to eat everything else with a lot of like relish and stuff like that. So there's a certain amount of like social stuff in there as well. But there's also fun stuff. So there's a character who's a dragon and his family.
As you do.
Yes, and there's also stuff where like so not everyone is straight, but they don't kind of have the words for that exactly at one point. It's like, oh yeah, males can't marry in England. But then there's another point where one character's talking about her kind of personal life issues. In fact, she's probably going to have to marry somebody to help her family's fortune, and she's willing to sacrifice for her family and stuff. And this other woman's a bit like, well, but why don't you just marry this other man because who's already married to a friend of hers? And it's like, no, it's like, well, many significant men take multiple wives, and it'd be nice if you were married to the same man as a friend of yours rather than her having to deal with a new wife. And it's like, oh, so there's sort of like cultural stuff there a bit as well, and it's just quite fun. Whilst also kind of dealing with various things. And the previous one's like as well, but it's like, there's portraits of these old magicians from years ago that talk, and they immediately start yelling at this woman and being awful to her because she's, as they say, a native and also a witch, and and a woman, and so she's doing stuff with demons in frames, but they actually do seem to be these old English blokes that just also shout at servants all the time and stuff. So then it's a bit embarrassing when one of their descendants turns up and they have to be a bit like, oh, I'm sure he wasn't really like that. It was probably just the way the artist drew the picture, and it's like. But anyway, I do recommend both these books because they are a lot of fun, and they're easy to read, and just I don't know in a bad way. They're fun to read, but also it's not all surface. There's stuff going on under the surface as well, and I don't want to say too much about them because they're kind of related. But so yes, that's my recommendation.
We get there in the end. Mel has kindly offered us how to pronounce thaumaturge on a text-based system. Thank you very much. Your assistance, your assistance is most appreciated.
You're just one of those people that probably reads things a bit more than I hear things.
I've got to say, I quite often, I'm very good at pronouncing things in my head, but don't ask me to actually pronounce them in reality. And everyone knows I'm terrible at names, so.
Yeah, well, I think it depends. It depends what you're used to and stuff as well, doesn't it? I'm quite good at Greek stuff because I already know a bit of that. But
that's right. Anyway.
Yes.
Trying not to lose magnets. So.
Yeah, probably best. So the thing that today's topic is basically the Wayfarer series by Becky Chambers, which is...
This will be spoiler light, don't worry. We're not going to...
We'll kind of mention a bit about it, but we're not going to... I mean, you can't read them, and also... Do you want to... Okay, you're holding glue, don't you?
Yeah. I'm not going to hold books and glue.
It smells a bit of glue here. But yes. So anyways, it's three novels, and the series actually won the Hugo Award for Best Series in 2019, which I think is quite deserved. So yes, the first one is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. The second one is A Closed and Common Orbit. The covers are mostly the writing and these nice backgrounds. So, and the third one is Record of a Spaceborn Few.
Nothing else. She's got a fun way of typing her books.
Yes, well, yeah. So yes, all written by Becky Chambers, who is an American author who I think lives in California, according to the bio I saw on her website, or maybe it was Wikipedia. Yes, so this is a series that sort of, the stories are kind of, they're not really connected, they kind of can be a bit down the line. It's probably even less so than The True Queen, actually. So the first one is about a ship called the Wayfarer, and it's sort of like a travelogue-y kind of
This
novel.
is slice of life sci-fi.
Yes, yeah.
This is what these are books that it's not to say they don't have plot, but they don't have, I wouldn't say necessarily have a driving plot.
It's character driven, rather than driven by plot or spectacle. So
in fact the first one I think has the most in the way of actual.
No, well the second one actually. It's just a lot of it's kind of backstory.
Yeah,
but if you take it as the whole thing, it's just it does flashbacks.
But anyway, certainly the first one has something that you would, sort of a goal and things that you might more expect in.
I kind of think of it as being a bit like a travel kind of one.
But they're slice of life. They give you a view of a world,
That's a
universe.
The setting.
Yeah, and the people that and the characters that are going about their everyday lives. And nothing. What I say, that's not nothing. Momentous things does happen, but it's not like it's unlike consuming fire.
It's not world-saving stakes.
Yeah,
it's more the stakes of the characters.
It's not like that their world is falling apart around them. They must save it.
Whereas Whereas in fairness, the True Queen, just think about, although I said this, it was quite easy to read, there are some quite high stakes there, but it kind of affects magic more than anyone else. Well, for sure, everyone is magical in that, but yeah. So yeah, The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. It's interesting, I think, how a lot of her titles kind of reveal the structure of the book. Because it is about the long way to a small angry planet. So basically it's about a ship called the Wayfarer, and they're contracted to build some sort of, I want to like, space highway thing? Tunnel.
They are tunneling through subspace, some other dimension.
But they have to take the long route there first.
To create a, you know, basically everyone else will be able to use the super fast highway. But you have to build it first. They've got to take the long way first.
Well, it's a bit like how you have to take a boat to build the bridge or something.
Yeah, so they must have faster than light engines, but they don't have.
Well, you get pinhole drives because that's how Rosemary gets to them.
True, yes.
That's
well, they basically.
I don't know. The tech bit isn't the bit that interests me quite so much. That's more Dave's area.
If I remember, certainly from the third one, they talked about pinhole drives briefly. I think so pinhole drives seem to be these ones that allow you to jump, but they're not as safe as the tunnels. So generally, you set up the tunnels in order to give people a safer route to and from.
Okay. So anyway, it's about this ship called the Wayfarer, which ends up kind of being the name of the series. Though this is the only book that the Wayfarer itself, thus far, has appeared in. Although there's links in the other ones, but again, there's sort of an element of them being standalone. It will just mention something a little bit with those. Well, yeah. I suppose the second one's a bit more related, but
I don't know. The third one one of the big characters is the sister of one.
But like, there's not much about it. I think they mention that he phones sometimes. But yeah, so the first Long Road to a Small Angry Planet, which is long to say. And as you can probably tell from the title, the place they're going to, there's been some diplomatic stuff. But yeah, so you've sort of got the crew, and it's very much kind of like the spaceship as a home environment, as well as being a workplace. So you've got all these people living together. It starts with a character called Rosemary, who's human but from Mars, and she is hired, I think, basically as a clerk to do like admin stuff. But then she meets, there's a captain who's human but is from what's called the Exodus fleet, which is mostly featured in the third book, which is basically where at one point humans left Earth and went into space and travelled quite slowly, but we'll go more into that with the latest book. And then there's another human on it who's from, I think, somewhere in the outer planets or something, or some sort of very dreary sounding moon, I think. He's the he basically deals with the algae stuff, which I think is to do with fuel, but it's kind of like botany and fuel. He's kind of grumpy and is kind of the curmudgeon of the ship, and then everyone else on the ship is non-human, and I will not remember all the names. Oh no, sorry, there's Kizzy and Jenks, isn't it? Sorry, and then there's the two engineers who are also, I've got how many humans there are.
Jenks technically still is human.
Well, I thought you just said dwarfism. That sounded very rude, Dave.
I thought, but he's got mods. So.
Yeah, but the point is he didn't. Yeah, so there's Kizzy and Jenks, who are the technicians, basically engineers. Kizzy seems to be mostly mechanics, and Jenks seems to be the AI, because the ship's run by an AI, who's of the type called Lovelace, which is sort of fun. Jenks, I assume, has dwarfism or maybe some sort of birth defect, and it's the kind of thing that it suggests he would probably, if there was the technology exists to kind of fix this, but Jenks chooses not to. Jenks, I think, is actually from Earth, but his mother, a lot of people on Earth are a bit weird. Like, I think she's from some sort of like slightly cultish group of people. That was it, yeah. Oh yes, yeah, I remember getting mentioned. Who are people who believe, oh, humans shouldn't be in space, they can't survive in space. It's like, but they clearly have. Or some sort of thing like that. So yeah, so it's them, and then yes, various alien crew members. There's Dr. Chef, who I think is called that because he's a chef, and I don't think
the doctor as well.
Yes, and the doctor. It's quite descriptive, but he's I assume he's kind of funny. He's kind of like, he's Dr. and Chef, so he's kind of like taking care of everyone and stuff, quite a bit. And then there's the pilot who's what's the name of her species? Her name's Sizzix. I'm not going to remember the species, but yeah, they have extra arms. There aren't any pictures. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But she's very kind of lovely. She's from a species that doesn't do families the same way that humans do. And at some point, they make comments about being mammalian and milk fed and stuff like that, and that being quite different because I think they're more reptilian. Andrisk, that's it, because they kind of like have scales and feathers. And then there's the one who's kind of like the navigator, who's actually like a kind of a pair. So you call them because it's actually two of them. But there's the species where you've got like the host and then a virus, but it's like this intelligent virus, and then they become paired. But yeah, it's kind of probably there's a bit too much detail there anyway. But it's kind of it's trouble. They go to different places, and each member of the crew has their own personal thing to deal with. So like one of them is in a relationship with someone from another species, and that is very taboo for that species. One of them feels a bit disconnected from their own species, but sort of engages with them when they meet them. One of them is kind of interested in whether AI should be allowed some sort of personhood, because they don't seem to be allowed that. And then they meet characters along the way, some of whom are friendly, some of whom are not so friendly. One of them, it turns out, there's some stuff in his background that means he gets detained by some very unpleasant people, and then the person on the ship who dislikes him the most ends up having to be responsible for him. There's a bit of romance, there's a bit of like conflict and stuff. So it's really kind of getting to know the characters. It's kind of got this very kind of homey feel, and it's very much an ensemble, and it's sort of you get to know these characters kind of through the point of view of Rosemary, who's new to the ship, and people kind of like just living together and getting on or not getting on very well. And trying to do something together. So it's as Dave says, it's very slice of life. I liked it.
People often compare it quite often to Firefly.
Oh yeah, that was I suppose it's kind of like Serenity a bit, but like with aliens.
Yeah, so but I mean obviously
and not Whedon-y.
Lacking the Western aspects of it as well. So
yeah. I suppose it's also a bit like it's kind of like Star Trek. I guess it's kind of like Firefly with aliens, or like Star Trek less militaristic, because they're just like they're just a crew who do different jobs and are trying to get by. It's just they've got this one very big job. But yeah, I think it's kind of a bit more friendly and family feel to it that kind of grows through it. Right, so if we go on to the second one, a closed and common orbit. This one's a bit different again. It features characters who appear in Long Way, but are kind of supporting or secondary. But it's basically about these two characters who basically it's kind of talk. So there's sort of stuff happening present, and then there's sort of stuff that happened before. So there's Jane and Sidra, who are both going through challenges. Jane was a genetically modified child slave, which sounds quite heavy. Well, this is I think Close and Common Orbit is kind of the one that has most of that, because she basically kind of escaped from where she was and has to survive under frankly very difficult and quite horrible circumstances. You think about the stuff with the dogs. Because a lot of these books do have a slightly fuzzy feeling and like feel like they're quite light, but I think Close and Common Orbit doesn't as much, just because there's that kind of background. But she is helped. She kind of ends up in what's basically a junkyard, and she finds an old ship that has an AI in it, and that AI helps her survive, not just in the kind of physical sense of like being able to have water and food and shelter, but also in like an emotional sense that AI basically kind of raises her. And this is somebody who kind of didn't have much of an identity for a lot of her life due to being, I think, a clone or something. But so it's kind of about how she survives and how she thrives, and also learns about life and things like that. And then there's Sidra, who basically is in a situation where her kind of the truth about what she is quite illegal, and so she's trying to figure a way out and figure a way in society with people helping her, and she's trying to like make friends and stuff, but she's always having to hide the secret about herself, and get used to kind of her situation now. And I think it's called Close and Common Orbit because you kind of got these two characters whose stories kind of it goes between the two, and you sort of see how there are similarities and differences and that and stuff. And that one again, it's less. It feels a bit less kind of like fuzzy and friendly than the first one, because of some of the stuff they're going through. But actually, the stuff with Sidra, it's mostly sort of people trying to help her out and actually, putting themselves at risk to protect her and her secret, and trying to help her thrive. And it's kind of about her learning about Sati, finding friends, finding community, understanding what these things are. So those bits are a bit lighter, but there's still obviously a lot of personal stakes for the characters. Yeah. So she has to figure out what she actually wants to do and who she wants to be. While you kind of got the story of Jane, who it sort of shows her getting older and just having to survive in, frankly, very horrible circumstances, but not becoming horrible, and again being supported and helped by someone who can, who tries to help her. So it's kind of like there's some slightly brutal stuff in it, but it's about people caring for and helping each other. So that's
and based on a planet rather than a.
Two planets, I suppose.
Two planets, but more the sort of main planet it's on. You get to see a lot more about the.
There's culture in one place rather than travelling around.
Yeah, and the sort of species, the aliens living together, so all the different
multicultural, I suppose.
Yeah, species that they've got on. I can't remember what the name of the planet is now.
Although there's ones that have light, so there's some people that communicate by kind of like lighted patches or like colour changing bits on them. Alien, something like that.
Yeah, something like
that. But they do. I think they have voice boxes just for communicating with other people. But like those people can't really lie to their own people because the colours just happen. So so stuff like that. Like obviously these people live in an intergalactic community. So there's a lot of stuff where people have adapted and do things for communicating with other species. But yeah. And then the third one, which Dave's just finished, is Record of a Spaceborn Few, which is basically, I said about the Exodus Fleet before, this is actually set in the Exodus Fleet, and there's, is it 6 viewpoint characters?
I think so, yes.
It's basically about 6 people who, for the most part, are in, or end up in the Exodus Fleet. So basically, quite a long time ago, in the thing, the Earth was basically dying and not fit to be habitable anymore. So humanity came together, tore down a lot of things they'd already created to create this space fleet and go off into space. So this is the one I've read most recently, because I've obviously read them in order. The others are a bit vaguer. And yeah, it's all about the sort of, so they create this space fleet, which was travelling for a long time, and then like first contact is made, and some humans are settled on Mars. There's still human communities on Earth, but they kind of are divorced from humanity for a long time until they get contact. They find these alien species and stuff. So it's kind of like now again, it's in the same thing. And again, the one of the viewpoint characters is the sister of the captain of the Wayfarer. But other than occasionally mentioning that their uncle was called to her kids, it's not really related. And it's just kind of about a load of ordinary people living in this fleet. So the fleet stopped travelling, and basically they were given a star by one of the other alien species, and so the fleet just goes round, just orbits this star. And it starts off with a catastrophe, in which, for I think just the dangers of living in space, on spaceships.
Knackered out spaceships.
Yeah, because these spaceships are incredibly old. And I mean, they've been upgraded a bit with some tech. So they used to be like spinning ones, that's how the gravity was created, and then artificial gravity was, found given to them. So, they've got that. There's a catastrophe, and a whole spaceship is destroyed, and that's obviously devastating.
They call them homesteads, and it's not quite. It's at this point they're described at one point as cities, a city. That they've cities made of cities, because they've literally torn apart and melted down their cities,
the Earth cities,
in order to make these.
Recycling, isn't it?
It is,
reusing.
These guys are
recycle.
The absolute epitome of.
And that's actually the whole of their culture.
Ethos is all about, recycling, reusing.
They were in space for so long, they didn't have any other resources. It's just what they had. So it's basically about 6 individuals that are from or in that, and it's interesting. It's a whole range of people. So you've got a woman who's I think works as some sort of engineering or scrap thing, but she's a mother of 2 children, and her husband's kind away a bit doing his work. There's an older woman who is what's called an archivist, and they're basically kind of like registrars and also celebrants for things. So they kind of do ceremonial roles and also administrative roles, basically like births and deaths and things of everyone on in the fleet. There's what's the euphemistic name for the one person's job? Caretaker. They're basically the funerary people who deal with the bodies. Which is interesting because they don't really mention when you have space-based things. What happens to the bodies? Becky Chambers has thought of a lot of stuff. There's also a teenage boy who's a bit bored and doesn't really know what he wants and have a lot of direction going around with his mate, who's perhaps a slightly more directions, but still, generally teenage boy. There's Sawyer, who was a human who lived on a planet which was majority a different species. And then he hears about this place where, almost everyone's human. He thought, no, actually, maybe I'll go there and see what that's like. So he's new and doesn't know a lot about it. Even though he's also human, he doesn't know much about the culture of this fleet. Because obviously, the culture on Mars is different to the culture of humans living on other planets, which is different to, the Exodan fleet.
His family would have, many years ago, ancestors kind of left the fleet.
This is the thing, because the fleet's sort of in a situation where a lot of people are like, well, why are we going round and around the sun on these space stations? Probably particularly after that. So the tragedy at the beginning is actually kind of like some years ago, and then it kind of jumps forward. But there's still, I think, ripples that. I think various people even go, well, maybe we should go to planets. So yeah, like the one with the kids has also got her father she looks after as well. Am I missing one? Or was there everyone?
I think that's everyone.
Okay. Anyway. Yeah, so it's very slice of life, but it kind of was. So that most of the characters are a bit divorced from each other, but like you find out about one part of the culture in like one person's thing, because again, it's not really explained. It's just kind of like people living their lives and do stuff, and it might become relevant in another part of it. And again, there's a lot of sense of community and also how this community is built. But these are old, long-standing communities. They're not exactly chosen. It's just people who've always lived there. But there's interesting stuff like, so there's lots of different surnames, but people don't get their surnames from their families, they get their surnames from where they live. So you'll have, it's interesting, everything's kind of arranged like a honeycomb. So you'll have like, everyone has their own kind of family home, as it were, which is a sort of group of rooms around a central hub. Then those sort of houses, as it were, are around the central hub. So you've got a community of like 5, or is it 6 families who, 6, because like honeycomb, who all kind of share communal facilities, and then so everything's kind of like, it kind of goes out to bigger and bigger things. So there's lots of stuff where like everyone will eat with the other 5 families that live in their thing, but you get your surname from the families who are there, and every room has like a wall where people put handprints, and they go back generations, and people aren't necessarily related, because it might be that like a new couple get married and they move out, either one of them might move into the family's thing and then they'll take that name, or they might move to a new one if there's space, and then they take on the name of that house. So there's lots of different like human surnames from all different cultures, but that doesn't tell you anything about what anyone actually looks like when you think about it.
Yes.
Anyway, did you want to say anything about your general impressions or stuff?
Yeah, I could do. So overall, I like that it focuses more on the world building stuff that you might miss in a more of a big threat kind of
plot-driven type thing.
Yeah.
Or like we will explain the science of this. I mean, there is a bit of that. But...
I mean, don't get me wrong. I love a good bit of epics, sci-fi. But on the other hand, it's nice to have a look at some of the difference, because that's what you look at things like Star Wars and Star Trek when you're looking at the species. People do see them. You sit there and go, well, how do these interact? How do they, obviously they never deal with the interesting, those sort of social stuff. It's more about pew lasers and...
Well, I mean, Star Trek does deal with social stuff. It's just all kind of, this is the philosophical question we're dealing with at the moment.
Yeah, okay. But, so...
And then there's a planet of hats.
Different hats, but hats nonetheless. So it's interesting, and obviously she put a lot of thought into... Well, I think she put a lot of thought into some bits, and then she's fleshed it out later, because as you only really run across things, information, when you actually need it. So it's not like you're getting info about. So you find out about a species at the point where you encounter them and you generally only find out little bits, and.
Well, again, it's very character driven, so yeah, it's interesting. The again, because Record of the Spaceborn Few is the one I read most recently and remember best. That felt so interesting to me because in that almost everyone's an alien. I mean, is a human. There are some aliens, so like the archivist character is in communication with a Homagian.
That's what I'd go with.
They're like
space slugs.
We see. I kept thinking of that guy from Farscape with the floaty thing. It's kind of how I pictured them.
Oh no, I think they're a lot more.
I have a slug phobia, so I'm not thinking
point.
about it like that. They're just going to be like Rigel.
Okay.
Is it Rigel?
It is Rigel.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, I know there was slime. I was not thinking about it. Anyway, so she sort of says that. So it's interesting because this archivist who has a very, she's senior. She has a very like august sort of role and important role in society is in recording things, but she's also been communicating with this woman who's from different species who comes to visit and is like asking questions, doing a bit of like research into into humans and stuff. And she suddenly thinks, well, how do we look to her? You've also got stuff like, you've got this woman who's trying to do the best for her kids, she's trying to do the best for her aging father. Lots of things in her life aren't very satisfactory, like her workplace is affected by crime, but there's not really much anyone can do. And but she feels she should be staying with the fleet because her brother has gone off and has his own spaceship. But is that the best thing for her? Is she putting everyone else first? There's these bored teenagers who are kind of like, they've done some school stuff and they need to see the next thing. What's the next thing going to be? But there's also, like they go on some teenage hijinks type stuff. And one lad is friend kind of pulls him in and stuff. And this lad's so there going, oh, I'm fed up with all these people around. But then like the guy who's come from another planet is just like, look at this community here. This isn't what we have on the planet I come from, where I think most people are. Was that Homagian or something else?
That was Homagian.
Yeah. Where there's like a small human sort of community and everything's kind of built at the wrong scale and it's not very comfortable. And he's here going, well, this place is designed for humans. Isn't it wonderful to be part of this community? But the people in the community are a little bit like wary of him because he doesn't know. Because like they don't use currency, they use barter. Currency is just for dealing with people that are out of the fleet. And they don't, so he gets used to stuff and there's not really... Stuff happens to him and it kind of makes other characters think about what they're doing. But I like the Becky Chambers sort of stuff you don't usually have. So what does happen with the bodies? Where do the bodies go? How do you deal with them?
I didn't understand.
Google, stop.
No one was talking to you, Google. It does that every so often. Unless my son tries to, if our son tries to activate it, it does not know what he's saying, but, the rest of us can see
it's a 50-50 chance if we know what he's saying, so...
Oh, he's getting that. And then, but there's also stuff like, how are births and deaths registered, how does the community keep its archives, particularly when there's, frankly, limited space. There's also stuff like, so they have cinemas, but the cinemas are kind of these, I think they're domes, and they only show films of Earth. Because the whole idea was that they realised when they built these spaceships, it's just kind of the care that these first generations who sent everyone into space came up with. So every single person, there aren't windows, because people on the outside would get windows, people on the inside wouldn't. So everyone has like a sort of well that goes down to basically a viewing gallery under their dwelling. So no person, everyone's housing is exactly equal, everything's equitable. They've got these cinema domes which, just play films of Earth. Because people, after a generation or so, won't have seen Earth. And they have any connection to the home planet, so they play basically, I think, like nature documentaries and just films of scenery and stuff. There's quite a few people, not main characters, but various secondary characters. And again, it's kind of based in a city, effectively. So there are a lot of, like, people who intersect with others who are named after Earth animals. Like, there's one guy who... was his name Walrus? Because his mum thought that was the same as like Wolf or Wolverine. Yeah. It was something like that. It was sort of funny, but yeah. But there's also stuff like this, like how do the bored kids of this society see it? How do the people who've lived a long time in this society see it? How does a new person to this society see it? How does somebody with a job that, while very important, is seen as a bit taboo or a bit uncomfortable see it? But there's also stuff like, basically sex work. It's like. Because a lot of the filmy type universe, you get stuff like, oh, there are some ladies in this place that, like, what, like when they have like alien bars and things. Actually, I suppose Star Wars doesn't do that so much. Maybe it's just bits of Trek. Anyway, thinking Quarks and all those ladies with the other people. But yeah, the point is there are sex workers, and there's stuff about them as well, in sort of two different ways. One of them which is somebody who's quite experienced, and one of which isn't. And that's quite funny. But there's no shame to it and stuff. And again, it's just, and also there's stuff like, there's certain duties, like everyone has to do like waist duty. But even the president does waist duty, because everyone has to do it, And that's how a newcomer can kind of ingratiate themselves, because they show that they're actually willing to be part of the community rather than just like turning up to do, the fun stuff.
Yes.
But yes, I was just very impressed with the thought gone into it. There's stuff about what children's play areas are like, including the section that doesn't have the artificial gravity in, so the kids can just float about in that one bit. It's just all the sort of normal stuff of life that you don't necessarily think about, in your own thing. But like, it's in space for generations after generations, which makes it really interesting. And there's just like attention to detail. I mean, I think like Dave was saying, it's slice of life, and it's not like your big epic sci-fi. But the thing is, for a long time, I kind of most considered myself a fantasy reader. I think that's mostly true. And I sort of thought sci-fi was something, well, I like films and TV and some short stories. But I didn't tend to read a lot of sci-fi novels. But then Becky Chambers is one of the ones where I absolutely will always grab it. And she's one of a few authors who do sci-fi that isn't like what I tend to think of it being like. And it is more character-driven and maybe a bit of slice of life. Or a bit more focused on like emotion and stuff like that. And just... yeah, it's sort of, and it's not even quite domestic, although there is that bit of it as well. But yeah, I mean, the other thing she thought of is like, what's the equivalent of a theme park? So the actual something that's like, it's not actually a roller coaster, but like, how would somebody do something fun and a bit dangerous feeling, but basically safe in space? Yeah. So it's kind of just all these things that don't turn up in other sci-fi, and I mean, all the books have that to extent, although some of them have a bit more like, one's a journey to a planet, and one's like somebody trying to ingratiate, like, settle into a planet, and what somebody's trying to escape from a bad planet. And this is just sort of like very much a community thing, but I just really liked it and was so impressed with kind of the thought of kind of stuff that gone into it. Yeah.
I mean, it's always interesting to see when they've, about the fact that I can't tell which way around this piece is going.
I've been trying to thread the needle for a while.
Okay. Humans aren't, are just another species.
No.
By no means are they. They're not important. They're not.
That's probably why the Hamagians coming to look at them.
Yeah, they're
part of the Galactic Commons, but I think it took a while.
They talk about how basically they were only just admitted. It's like there are argument whether they're actually worth admitting. Were they just animal? Were they any better than animals? Kind of thing. So humans aren't just everywhere. I mean, I think they are everywhere by that point of the books, but they're not. They're not any sort of power. They're not. It's not. Oh, you're a human. It's like, well, no, you're just a human.
Yeah, I think it's because when humans encountered when the Extant fleet encountered a lot of the other species, they'd already got, and like they were more technologically advanced.
Yeah, and they still are. I think.
Yeah.
And there's interesting the sort of carving out their niche. So they've got their human settlement where they're into modding. So they're big on the cybernetics. Which is viewed differently amongst, not necessarily everyone approves of it.
Oh, that's true. That's kind of comes into the second book a bit, doesn't it? So.
Yeah. So, and then but it's not a helpful piece of a.
Oh dear.
Yeah. So it's the they're. I'm sure I had more sensible things to say, but I'm losing.
You're trying to focus on the thing that's not doing whatever the thing actually needs to. I mean, what we'll say is also.
That's the way.
I did just because that's apparently so this. So this one's actually signed. I don't know if that's going across. The author signature is there. So Becky Chambers came to Birmingham in 2016. Yes, because I was pregnant. That's her. Thanks. And did a talk at the Waterstones in the city centre. And that was really good, although I couldn't get a bus because they weren't stopping and had to run and get a train. And also was pregnant, so then had to immediately go pee as soon as I got to the bookshop, because that's how that works. Anyway, so I was a bit fussed when I got in, but so I bought the book and got it signed, but she did a bit of a talk, and it was just really interesting. She seemed like really pleasant and friendly, and she was talking about various things about how to make the characters. So one of the characters in the first book is very much based off of somebody she actually knew, although she's not currently in contact with the person, and then like one of the alien characters is like kind of her favourite, because of how she is, but yeah, and she was just talking about lots of like friendly stuff about, I think her mum's like an astrobiologist, which is actually, I think, where some of the stuff in, so she also has a standalone novella, which is called To Be Taught If Fortunate, which I've read fairly recently. It's not related to the Wayfarer stuff, I'm not even sure if it's this, I don't necessarily think it's the same universe. It's quite different. Again, it's kind of a bit of a travelogue thing, but it's also, it's about earlier space travel and about, you know, people get sent out quite far, but other people home still interested. You know, things changed. And yeah, there are some bits that kind of fall into the genre that I kind of call things are a bit bleak in space now, which describes quite a lot of short fiction. I do like science fiction short fiction, but sometimes you get, and some magazines will do quite a lot of a bit of like, things are quite bleak in space now, and you're like, we're in space, but we're all quite miserable. And it's like, oh, okay, yes. But that only has part of it. This one also has things are wondrous in space, and oh, look, we've discovered some stuff. So, you know, it's a bit of a mixture. It's like we're on a spaceship, or it's all gotten a bit bleak. Which I think is probably a sci-fi genre in itself. But yes, she's talking about how her mother's an astrobiologist, so she's always asked some other questions. I didn't even know astrobiologist was a job one could have, but I think her mother is one. When she's talking about like a nice story about how she met her wife and their shared love of Star Trek. So it was just very nice, and she's very friendly. And I think it was October 16 because it was after Brexit but before Trump.
There we go. That's the world how we live.
Yes, but yes, no, yeah, that was quite good.
A former colleague who liked to read, but had very disparaging comments on science fiction. I did fire her first day for making disparaging comments about science fiction.
I don't think you have the power to fire people.
Yeah, it didn't stick. She left for other reasons, not that I fired her for not like.
You're not allowed to fire people.
No, I'm not allowed to fire people.
He is joking.
I suggest she was asking first. She thought she'd expand her, which I hats off to her for embracing. So I
if you're in the library, you might as well.
I suggested the first.
Long way to
Planet. She promptly devoured that one and read all the others. In fact, she'd read. Well, she'd read
Spaceborn Few. Because they've only read it like this week.
I did.
But again, it's the kind of science fiction, like when a lot of people think science fiction is like stereotypical thing, it's like, oh, people doing daring do in space, and there are lasers and robots and probably some fighting. And there's yeah. Oh, I mean, and that's fine. But the point is, like I say, for ages I consider myself more of a fantasy reader. I guess I am still more. But there's certain science fiction where I'm like, no, actually, you know, oh, this is different. So I think it's just that. And also, I mean, the first book was originally crowdfunded. She did it on Kickstarter to get money so she could work part time to finish it. And I think it was published through that in some way, and it got picked up by Hodder and Stoughton. But it was also, I think it was one of the Radio 4 books as well.
Oh, fair enough. That'll do. That does good things for your sales.
Yeah. So the first book was quite, and it's one that people talk about quite a lot before I bought it, sort of thing. Yeah. So because I've got the paperback there. So yeah, I think it's good that like it's sort of like a different tone. Like it's still science fiction, obviously, because spaceships and aliens and people live in space. But like it's a different sort of tone, a different sort of like thing to what people might stereotypically assume. Yeah,
I think it just does broaden out science fiction as a genre. I think
I think there's a few things like that, and that's the stuff I like.
Yeah, there's more of it coming about. It's
we'll probably talk about some other ones later as well.
At some point, yes, there are a few of them.
Although some of them you haven't read, so that might be a bit. We'll see.
Okay. I can read.
Well, no, I know. Well, they're in the house.
Exactly.
You have quite a big TBR shelf.
Yeah, or I could borrow them from my local library as soon as I could get into my local library.
No one can get to the library, so yeah. Anyway. Yes, so that's... Is anyone saying things? Have questions?
No.
Sure.
no one said anything interesting. Manuel was happy to help with the language, with the how to pronounce things.
Sure.
I feel there's a certain degree of sarcasm there.
I suppose he said you mangled quite a few names.
Yeah, he said we mangled quite a few names in there.
A lot of those were from made-up games.
To be fair, yes. Why these Pathfinder adventure paths need to come up with such complicated names for characters? I mean, why just they can't call them Bob or Dave or Frank? Yes, I know they're just a bunch of men.
Valid, yeah.
Because a lot of NPCs are male. But you know, yes, there are lots of valid names. It's just that these tend to be a lot of very made-up ones. It's very, very awkward for Dave.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to figure out names that you're not familiar with pronouncing, it's probably better to do ones for like actual real people from real world cultures. But yes. Yeah, okay. Did we have anything else to say?
Not so much. Go read the
This
books.
hasn't been very structured again. I feel like we've just
No, we that's pretty
but
much.
But if that's what we enjoy doing, you know.
I would say that you know, everyone stuck around for it, but Manuel stuck around for most of it. Thank you, Manuel.
Thank you.
I mean, we do. I think our problem is we could ramble on in a lot of detail, but we don't want to spoil them.
Yeah.
I think they're very, you know.
And to be a bit circumspect with some of it. I suppose it's that we're not kind of like our intros are a little bit long, and then we're just sort of going on about
Bob
stuff
the elf
rather than analysing. But you know.
Manuel says Bob the elf won't help for the immersion. That's fair enough. I did have Bob the dragon on one of my Exalted games. That was mainly because I could not pronounce the name that they'd given him.
Sure. Okay. Yes.
Well,
yeah. Anyway.
Yes, because we waffle, but it's mainly because I think we'd like people to come into them and enjoy them without too much in the way of spoilers, so that you know it's not so much of a plot thing. I think it's just a feel for. Yeah.
Also, we kind of. I suppose we're not even reviewing stuff so much as
we're just waffling.
But this is kind of one of the ways we're relaxing in these very stressful times.
And this is kind of how we just this is an insight into our life.
Also, we are kind of doing another thing with our hands at the same time.
Yeah.
So we've kind of put ourselves slightly on hard mode with this. Like it, you know. I mean, I haven't done reviews for a while, but I have in the past done reviews partly for my blog, which is quite old. But also for like Hub Magazine and the British Fantasy Society, I did the book reviews, and obviously those are better. But I've written those, so you know there's a bit of drafting involved.
I think we should have to say it's you know these are excellent books that are well worth at least trying the first one for. I think you can read any of the out of order.
Yeah, because they're not. Yeah, I'd say the first two kind of one very directly follows the others, but again it's kind of like more supporting characters from one to the other. The third one, it's kind of other than like. Somebody mentioning Hubruff.
I think you get more.
It's not so related, sort of thing.
Certainly, but I think you get more out of it having read the others. So you know, you have a.
I mean, it's just because it's the more recent one I read, but Record of Spaceborn Few just really impressed me with all the stuff in it. And I think it's because in some ways it's all humans. You think, oh, maybe it's not as interesting because there aren't all the aliens, but actually, it was all this stuff that is so human and isn't usually written about. But it was in space, and a lot of thought got into how that worked in space. And I just remember being very impressed when I read it.
There we go. Yeah. I think we've come to the end of our waffle on that one.
We probably have done, yes.
Otherwise, we could keep waffling for a while.
No, we should probably, yeah.
But yes, it's coming over. We're over an hour now, so.
Okay, we keep doing that though.
That's fine. Just means we.
So, are we wanting to do this again? When? A week or 2 weeks?
We'll say 2 weeks, just so we've got time to prep.
Okay, the prep was me writing a page or something. Like,
okay.
I've done the prep.
Okay.
Okay.
It might be next week, it might be the week after. Keep an eye on our Facebook page.
Yeah.
Our Facebook pages.
Yeah, hopefully these will go on YouTube at some point, but David needs to sort out.
We just need to.
Because you're the one that knows how to YouTube.
Sorry, I've already uploaded it, I just need to put the title of the
okay,
on.
Sure.
Yeah, I did that.
You didn't mention that you'd done it.
I thought I had.
No.
When okay. Minor things like that.
Sure.
I'm glad I can mangle a name 3 times differently. It's a skill. Thank you. Do you want to show it? How far have you got? Are you mostly talking?
No, I've got. I went from somewhere on the. Oh no, I did this. So somewhere on this bit of the swan to round partway up its neck, and now I have a knot. so I'm going to have to undo that bit. But you know, yeah, done with it. Although I was here talking a bit.
I think you can tell who was talking more and who was sitting doing, which is usually how it goes.
I think that's kind of our dynamic, isn't it?
Yeah, which is fine. I have put together that much of Thanos' throne. It's a big throne.
It smells quite a lot of glue in here.
For reference, pear drops. That's what the solvent smell. The plastic glue solvent smells like. So that's part of his throne, and I have also done Thanos himself. There he is. I've magnetised his fist. He comes with a fist with the gauntlet and all its infinity gems, and one without the gauntlet. And I have magnetised it so I can swap them over. Because there's two ways of playing him in the game. You can either play him as a sort of, I say, normal character, a ridiculously powerful character, but with only 2 infinity gems. So you'd have without the gauntlet. Which ones? No, you can pick any of the 6.
Does that change the thing in the game?
What's the
like which do you have?
Yeah, it changes what you can do.
Okay, that's
yeah. They have different abilities, and then there is a special game mode where you basically fight Thanos, and with him controlling all 6 gems. So basically, it's you with a full team plus someone else with a full team to hopefully you can bring him down, which sounds fun. One day I might get to play this game. At the moment, I'm just painting the models because they are cool, and I'm hoping for X-Men. I like X-Men. That will be coming up another day.
Yes, there will be some talk about X-Men at some point, which point you might do more of as well.
Yeah, I think at that point I'm just like, well, hang on, if I superglued my... It's fine. I haven't glued the glue to my painting.
Okay.
Oh, I think at this point,
yeah,
after
we should probably
covering ourselves in glory and gluing things to things that didn't need to be glued to.
I'm not in my thread, so
I think I win.
Anyway, yes. So thank you for watching if you got this far and joining us. And yes, we will be doing another one in either 1 or 2 weeks, depending on maybe how we feel.
Yes, I think we'll look at the calendar and see what we're doing.
I'm just thinking because in 4 weeks is the day before my busiest day of the year. So
okay, well, we'll see. Yeah,
we
will promise we'll be back for more.
Yes.
And yes, if you have any suggestions for topics, you can always send us a message. We'll take on any
How
suggestions.
do the people know which things we both like? They can probably guess.
They can suggest. I mean, we don't have to do it.
That's true. Okay.
You know, I'm willing to take. You know, they might spark an idea.
That's true. Yes. Yeah.
You never know. Plus any comments, but we shall reply to comments.
Okay.
Other than that?
Yes, well, yes, thank you. And yes, take care and stay safe.
Bye. Night.
Bye.